I kicked my son and his new girlfriend out, then he went missing. I, 55 meters, have two children, George, 31M, and Gabrielle, 29F. Gabrielle recently got engaged, and I am helping her plan the wedding in my spare time, an event the entire family is very excited for, except for George. George recently divorced his wife of 7 years, Susanna, after he said the spark had gone out. They have a set of twins, Amy and Alice, both 6 years old, and are trying to establish a healthy co-parenting relationship. Susanna is a great mother to my grandkids, and I was disappointed in George for giving up so fast on their relationship without even trying couples counseling. But it wasn't my business or place to say anything. The drama started when George brought his new girlfriend to dinner at my house. He met his girlfriend, Bethany, through a work colleague, and they have been dating for 4 months. At dinner, Gabrielle and I were discussing flower arrangements, and Bethany felt the need to ask George if he'd ever marry again. George coughed before replying that he'd have to think about it, which seemed to deflate Bethany. Well, this caused Alice to cry about how she wants mommy and daddy to love each other again. George and Bethany just sat there while my granddaughter screamed. After I comforted Alice, I pulled George aside and asked if he was sure about Bethany, to which he told me it was none of my business. I told him it was my business who he invited into my home and my grandchildren's lives since I've been caring for them in my spare time while he works. George got angry and said it was Gabrielle's fault for mentioning weddings in the first place. I told him to stop acting like a child and to be happy for his sister. Then Bethany felt the need to insert herself and tell me that she and George were together no matter how much I liked his ex-wife. After that, I was done with the conversation and asked them both to leave. George and Bethany stormed off, flipped me the bird, and left my grandchildren at my house at 7 p.m. I had to call Susanna to collect the children since they had school in the morning, and I was attending a cake tasting with Gabrielle the next day. I feel like I shouldn't have to tell my 31-year-old son to be happy for his sister or argue with a random woman whom I have never met before, in my own home. Relevant comments. George needs to pay for daycare for a while. The truth is George can't afford daycare with the child support and alimony he owes Susanna. I agreed to babysit my grandchildren as a favor to him. I love my grandkids. But I wish George would appreciate the thousands of dollars I'm saving him each month. What exactly were you asking when you asked if he was sure about Bethany? I was asking if it was really the right time to introduce her to the family, since his daughters are still sensitive about the divorce and are trying to come to terms with it. I didn't ask him in the context of is Bethany right for you. I meant it as in are you sure this is the right time to introduce her? I didn't inherently dislike Bethany, but maybe it would have been better to introduce her to my grandkids after they've recovered from the divorce. Update 1. This situation happened a few hours ago and I thought it right to make an update. Bethany came to my house to apologize for how she acted at dinner last week. She told me that she was 2 months pregnant and George had broken up with her after she told him. Because he has too much responsibility and didn't want to be in the baby's life. I then spent the better part of 3 hours talking with Bethany about the baby and what she wants. She says she wants to keep the baby even if George refuses to be in its life, and I told her that I would help with childcare if she needs it since she doesn't have any family that live nearby. Before I got angry with George, the first thought I would call him and give him a chance to explain. George was angry that Bethany had shown up at my house and insisted that it wasn't his baby. I told him that he should get a paternity test and he asked me for $500 to cover it since he's struggling. I told George that he needs to figure it out himself since he's about to be a father of 3, and that he better step up and do right by his kids. George then hung up. Well, 2 hours later I get a call from Susanna to say that George hadn't picked up the kids like he'd previously agreed to and could she drop them at my place because she had work. I agreed for her to drop Amy and Alice off and tried to call George again. I called 12 times and they all went to voice message. I don't know where George is and have called his place of employment to try to find out, however they refuse to tell me anything. I've agreed to watch Amy and Alice until Wednesday and Susanna has reported this incident to CPS. I assume she plans to file for full custody and I can't blame her. Right now I'm worried that George has run off somewhere or done something irresponsible. I am disgusted and will not be doing him any favors in future unless he has a very good explanation and accepts some responsibility. Update 2. I made the original post about 2 months ago and since then things have been a bit crazy lately, so I just wanted to update as I had people asking if George was okay. In my first post people suggested I give George some space and time to figure things out as a recently divorced father, but after he ran off around 2 months ago I ended up filing a missing persons report. I talked to George's workplace the day after I filed the report and they told me he had given his 2 weeks about a month ago. I then tried calling George again and he finally picked up. He told me he was okay but he had moved states and no longer wanted any contact with his children because it was all too much responsibility for him. I snapped at George and told him he couldn't just decide now he didn't want to be a father. Then George told me he never wanted kids in the first place and those kids don't look anything like me anyway. George then told me to F off and hung up the call. After that I informed the police department what had happened to let them know George wasn't in any danger and that we knew his whereabouts. I just started to cry because I couldn't believe I had raised such a selfish person. Susanna has filed for full custody, and George, as far as I know, is refusing to pay child support and will probably end up in jail at some point. Bethany is now 4 months pregnant and is having a boy, with George being the father. Somehow, he managed to come up with the $500, so he will have to pay child support since he doesn't plan on being in the baby's life. Bethany moved into my home in November since she's had trouble doing things herself, and her doctor says she's at risk of preeclampsia if she becomes too stressed during the pregnancy. In that time, we have gotten closer, and despite how our first meeting went, I actually have come to like Bethany. Sorry, this isn't the happy ending some of you were expecting. I have been following the advice I received from the first post and have not contacted George, and he has not tried to contact me. I can only hope with time he pulls himself together and manages to step up as a father. Again, thank you to everyone who gave helpful advice. I'm not sure if I will be updating further, however. Take care everyone.